thank you for those of you that have called in and are participating. My name is Justin Moeller. I'm going to be the one speaking today during the presentation. I thought I'd give you a brief introduction on myself and the background on my expertise, and talk a little bit about, at a high level, what we're going to go through in the presentation. But I've spent the past 15 years or so working primarily in the state and local tax consulting area. I started my career with the largest accounting firm in the world, Arthur Andersen. I worked for another very large firm, Crowe Chiswick at the time, and now I'm an owner of Watson&Associates. And our business, we work with small and medium-sized businesses, and the topic today is very important.
Someone has joined the conference.
For our small and medium-sized businesses, the Ohio use tax. So, what we're going to talk about today in this presentation is the Ohio use tax. I want to give you an idea of what it is, because most of our clients that we talk to have no clue what the Ohio use tax is. In fact, when we talk about this, they're shocked. And I think some of you that are participating today may have a similar reaction. So we're going to tell you what the use tax is, give you some background on it, explain to you when the use tax applies, the type of things that you need to be looking at in your business, and then we'll go into why we're talking about it now. There's a new initiative that Ohio's launching, and why you really need to pay attention to it now in your business. So feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. We'll do our best to answer those during the call here. If for some reason we're unable to answer those in the call, I'll be happy to follow up with folks to get your questions answered. So with that, we'll go ahead and start into the presentation here. As I mentioned, I want to give you some background on what the Ohio use tax is. Okay, the use tax, it's been around since the 1930s. I know most folks have never even heard of this tax. But it really is no different than sales tax. Everyone knows what sales tax is. When they go to the store, they purchase an item. If they looked at their receipt, they would see sales tax on there. Use tax is really no different. However, the slight difference is that when a transaction, a vendor does not charge sales tax, just because sales tax is not charged does not mean that tax is not due. And when the vendor does not charge sales tax, that's when the use tax comes into play. Okay, so the use tax, it applies to all the same type of transactions that the sales tax does. It's the same rate. So again, that's what the use tax is. So to talk a little bit about this, I mentioned earlier in my opening remarks that most small to mid-sized businesses have no clue what this tax is. It's been around since the 30s, as long as the sales tax has, but we work with the Department of Taxation on a daily basis. And in fact, if you were to go to their website, it would tell you that they believe there are 300,000 small businesses, small to medium-sized businesses, that do not have use tax accounts that should. Again, the tax has been around for a long time, so there are approximately 18,000 businesses that have use tax accounts and file on a regular basis. But historically, the focus has been on large businesses, because that's where the tax dollars are, and that's where it makes sense to spend a lot of time from the state's perspective. So again, it's not new, but the focus has been on large business. And we'll talk about it in greater detail later on in the presentation. That's about to change. And we have this slide in here to just give you some idea to kind of drive home the point that this isn't new. So for everyone on the line that has filed their 2010 Ohio individual income tax return, if you went back in your files and you pulled this out, you turned to page 2, right here, even on our personal Ohio income tax returns, there's a line on the return that says unpaid Ohio use tax. So even us as individuals are supposed to pay use tax on purchases where there's sales tax not applied. So for example, one really simple example that most people can think or relate to are purchases over the internet, Amazon.com. Just because you buy an item on Amazon.com, you buy your flat screen TV or your treadmill or whatever that large ticket item might be, just because Amazon has not charged you sales tax even us as individuals, that does not mean tax is not due. And us as individuals, we're supposed to turn that tax over as part of our Ohio personal income tax returns each year. So, to kind of build on some of these examples, as business owners, the things that we need to be thinking about, really the low-hanging fruit, what I refer to as the low-hanging fruit, it's out-of-state purchases. In today's world, it's so easy to conduct business with out-of-state vendors, and it happens on a regular basis. So, what oftentimes happen is that if I have a vendor who's located in the state of Indiana, as an example, well, if that Indiana company has no physical presence in the state of Ohio, the state of Ohio cannot force them to charge sales tax to its Ohio customers. Okay. However, just because Ohio cannot force them to charge sales tax, that does not mean that if I'm buying items for use in my business from an Indiana vendor that I don't owe tax on that. And that's where the use tax comes into play. So again, that's one of the low-hanging fruit items, again, I refer to as out-of-state purchases. It's very simple and easy to identify out-of-state purchases and determine whether it was sales tax charged on the invoice. And oftentimes you'll see that sales tax is not charged. But it's not only out-of-state purchases. It happens every day for in-state purchases. Sales and use tax law is very complicated and confusing. There are over 100 exceptions in the law. There's different interpretations of what's taxable and what's not. So what often happens is in-state businesses, they're not always 100% sure on whether they should be charging sales tax on what they're selling. So for example, repairs and maintenance services, that's a taxable service in the state of Ohio. Landscaping, lawn care services, that's also a taxable service. But oftentimes you'll find some of the smaller businesses providing those services, they may not understand or realize that they're supposed to be charging sales tax on those services. However, even if they're not charging sales tax, that does not mean that that tax is not due on that transaction. And if it's a taxable service or a taxable purchase and the tax wasn't charged, well, the use tax applies. So, why are we talking about this now? Most of you on the line, I'm sure you're probably familiar with the recent budget that the state of Ohio went through. That it was signed into law in late June, early July. And as we all know, the state of Ohio was forced to deal with some very tough issues. In fact, there was an $8 billion budget deficit that the legislature had to wrestle with and try to plug that hole. So, the state needs money. And that's the reality. And they've got to cut costs where they can, and if they can raise revenue, they're going to look at ways to do that. Another reason why is this important now? I mentioned earlier that the state has identified 300,000 small and medium-sized businesses that they believe should have use tax accounts. And what's going to happen is that later this month or early September, they are mailing letters to all of those businesses to let them know that they believe they have a filing responsibility. So these 300,000 businesses that I mentioned, they will soon be getting letters from the department, and that, if you are a business owner and you get that letter, you know with absolute certainty you are on the list. So that is why we're talking about it now. This is why business owners absolutely positively have to pay attention to this, because we'll talk later in the presentation about what will happen if you ignore it, or the potential of what could happen if you ignore it. And it will not be pleasant. So that's why we're talking about it now. The department's ramping up their efforts. They have a discovery program. Letters are going out here in the next couple weeks. So you're going to have an opportunity to deal with this. And most businesses that I talk to, that's not a welcomed opportunity. They're going to be forced to go back a couple years, which we'll talk about here in a little more detail.